everyone, and welcome back to the Giant Podcast, where we talk all things rugby league and Huddersfield Giants. I am your host, Cameron Deacon, and joining me today, as always, is, even though Paddy Powell might not know him, his best friend, it's Huddersfield Hall of Famer Earl Crabtree.
Thank you, good to be back.
And we're also joined by matchday announcer Mr. Tim Burton.
Hello.
And our guest today, he does a job at the Giants which might just be one of the most important jobs within the club. It's Player Welfare and Education Officer Steve Hardisty.
Thank you very much. Nice to be in good company.
Yeah. Just before we start, I do want to mention that tweet you put out to Paddy Power.
Oh yeah,
about the thing about Huddersfield. Was that, were you having a jab at them or not? I couldn't quite tell.
No, I think they've had a jab at me before in the past anyway, so I'm already known to them. But
have they? What have they said to you?
Hammered me on. I was on Sky Sports, doing some stuff for the Giants and also RFL, and they hammered me about wearing Giants gear, which I found really weird since I was representing the club. I found it was a bit strange. But anyway, they hammered me about it, which is fair enough. But no, I was just letting them know that there's other people in Huddersfield.
If they're on telly, right, doing something about the odds at the races, aren't they usually wearing Paddy Power coats and stuff like that?
I'd have thought they would have been, but
they get
maybe not.
They get all their sponsors to wear Paddy Power underwear, so it's
just ironic, isn't it? Really?
How do you know that they get all their sponsors to wear Paddy Power underwear?
Is that what you look at?
What have you been doing?
No.
Moving on, I think.
Okay,
chaps.
I think we've learned a little bit there.
Also, I've just seen your music video that you were involved in.
Yeah, it's pretty special.
What was that for?
It's for Bravado Cartel, which are a local band. Will Bloy actually asked me to star in his music video. Sorry, feature. Don't start. Well, kind of start.
You weren't singing, were you?
No, I can't sing. But they wanted me purely for my acting skills.
What for your looks, obviously.
Alright, corner. Unbelievable. Is this because I've been hammering you about being small all the time?
As per.
Is that not bullying me now?
Well, listen, all I'm doing is retaliating. You can't. What am I supposed to do? Just sit here and not say anything back to you?
I think it's quite ironic that the welfare manager's here today. Like a referee.
Be careful.
Yeah, you can give us your points a little bit later on, but we've got a little bit of history of me and Tim. We keep hammering each other constantly, but I think
it's more like you hammering me, Earl, to be honest.
I don't have any issues with your size. It's clearly
you do have issues with my size.
I
think you are jealous of me being a pocket rocket and you being like 6'7" stretch.
Is that what you are? Is that what you are? Pocket rocket? Is that because you last a couple of seconds?
Come on.
Moving swiftly on. Steve, you are, as mentioned, the Player Welfare and Education Officer. You do both jobs, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, it's a dual role in relation to education and the mental well-being programmes at the club.
And in terms of what actually you do generally, how would you generalise what your job is as a Player Welfare Officer?
Oh, good question.
Not sure it is something you can generalise, is it? Really? No, there's so many elements to it, isn't there?
Yeah. We tasked. So there's one of me at every Super League club, and
Clones of Steve.
Yeah. 11 more. It's a scary thought. And we're tasked with a range of things that we have to involve the players in on an annual basis. And it's no 2 days are the same. And it's a case of there's certain things that we have to do. For example, we have to schedule in a range of workshops around the elements of mental well-being, around preparing players for life after rugby league, because as you know, Earl in particular, it's not a long career on the face of things, and the realisation is when people finish, that 9 times out of 10 they're not actually financially secure, so they have to look for another work source. And most players that finish around in the mid-30s are looking at another 30 years of the working life remaining. So it's a real important part, alongside other things that crop up on a day-to-day basis. It's very multifaceted. But it's a role that I really enjoy.
So it's interesting because speak a lot to people who come, and it's like that transition from one thing to another.
Yeah.
So part of your job is to help them transition from that being a player.
Yeah.
Because I've always thought that doing that, especially if you've been a player like for as long as you were, Earl, you go from playing for 15 odd years, longer than that, it's to suddenly go on to move into doing an actual job.
Yeah.
Then it must be hard for people.
Yeah, it's very tough, and just taking Earl as an example of someone who was really proactive when he was still playing, and worked really hard in relation to his networking and the opportunities that were available to him at the time. He grasped with both hands, and that's really set him up in a good position for when he chose a time, whether it was right for him to exit the game and move on to different avenues. There's some players who could work a little bit harder in that period of time, because there's so many things available to players now, and there's a lot of support. But at the same time, I empathise with them that it's a scary prospect as well, from someone who could have maybe come out of school at 16, joined a professional academy, and that's all they have known. And it's a really scary prospect that there will be a day, and it comes to every player, that that's the playing rugby league professionally is not an option for them anymore, and they have to go into something else.
I'd just like to jump in at this point, because it's obviously something that we deal with on a daily basis. Actually, we have regular meetings to me and Steve, and I've been through all of this, and I've been that kid that's left school, gone straight into this environment. And I've done the best I could with probably the opportunities I had within the game, but the game's changed and constantly changing. There wasn't a Steve Hardisty around when I started and went through most of my years. I was proactive and put myself in a position where I like to think I could go on to other things. And I think now that players have the opportunity because there's so much in place, but I'm always conscious that me growing up, I think the biggest thing is I didn't have the education. I don't mean the education as in going to university and doing courses. I just mean like life skills. I didn't know what to do with my finances. I had no idea. You just get given a wage, and because you haven't been educated and never been through anything like that, mortgages and pensions and things like that, just as one facet of it, I never knew what to do. And this is why it's important for me as well, is to try and help the players of the future actually have a better grasp of what it means, to understand their finances, especially because the reality is it ends, and it does end, and sometimes abruptly as well, and you need to be in the best position you can. And that's I brought in a sponsor called Burton Hills Wealth Management. They do some sponsorship at the Giants, and basically we put on a workshop where we put them in front of the players, and I think straight away about 10 of the lads all went to go and meet them, because they don't really know what's best to do with the money. And this is the thing, and we just have an expectation of players to know. We assume that they will just know what to do, and I think part of Steve's job is to make sure that we don't just assume that they know what to do, and there's different angles with that as well. And I suppose Steve will know the players probably better than anybody else does, and that's why it's so important to any team is a player welfare officer.
Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, as Andy Kelly reminds me on a daily basis, I never had a playing career. But before I was in the position of welfare, I've been at the club 6 years prior to that, in the old title of play performance manager. So I worked directly with the head of youth, predominantly with the academy. So I was always around the first team, but I never actually worked with them directly. So in relation to giving a good first impression and trying to empathise, and there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathising with someone is to actually see from their perspective, actually be in their shoes. And I worked really hard in the first few months of the role, and I got a lot of sound advice, in particular from the person to my right, where I actually asked him questions, and I was genuinely interested in his thoughts and his journey in particular, alongside with a couple of other key people I always look on for support, because I couldn't see from his point of view. I'd not had an illustrious career like Earl had. I'd not played for my country. I'd not been in that position. So to actually find that empathy and that congruence required to do the job well took time. So my role with the players is based on respect and honesty, and they are my tools in relation to doing the role effectively. Because, like I say, I don't have that background of playing. So, but at the same time, I feel that coming from an academic background, there was something I could offer that maybe a player couldn't in certain areas as well, in particular with the academic process, of which I have experienced. So I think getting that nice blend is a good thing, and it's really, we've achieved some good things on the back of that recently. But my support network at the club in relation to past players and current players is invaluable for me.
So what is your relationship like with the players then? Is it one where you are just, they understand that you are a player welfare officer, or is it you're somebody else who they can just go and speak to?
Yeah. So ultimately, I am employed by the club. I wear the brand, as you can see, but I make it clear to the players that I'm not part of performance staff. I'm here for the players. So the characteristics of a high performing environment is people lose jobs. And head coaches change, assistant coaches change, but that's something that wouldn't necessarily feature myself. So I'd be in that position regardless of a change, if that makes sense. But just going back to the point I made a couple of moments ago, it's the honesty and it's the respect in relation to me. So the players, I hope they are. The players are clear what my role is and that I'm there for them specifically. In particular, that's really important when we have conversations around things that are embroiled in confidentiality, which a lot of conversations are. And just to give you an example, if that was, for example, to be shared with someone at the club who that player didn't necessarily want to know, then I'd lose credibility from that perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you said to it.
So I was is your time predominantly with the first team, or is it equally divided between the first team and the academy?
One of the beauties of the club, which is important to say, is the access to the players is fantastic, and I know that some other PWMs at other clubs, they don't have that luxury. Obviously, I'm based over at the training centre. I see players as and when. I'm always around the players, so there's the clear accessibility there. At the same time, we have areas of the club where we can go and have those confidential conversations, not only in the workplace but on the outside. With regards the welfare programme, it is specifically funded for first grade. So Andy Kelly, who's our head of youth, he's responsible for the welfare provision for the junior and senior academy. But realistically, I would top up and help Andy with anything that came to his door as well. So just to give you an idea, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit further on in this podcast, is the Tackle the Tough Stuff campaign that happened last week. Obviously, Matty English represented the club in a fantastic way. So brave is that young man. But on the back of that, what a lot of people don't see is the risks that happen below first grade. So we've had a fair number of people from the senior academy come forward to wanting to discuss certain things because they've seen Matty be so brave. So obviously that initially comes to Andy's door, which I would work with him on at the same time.
Yeah, he spoke about running, didn't he? And that's not confidential because it's out there and how it affected him. But there's been other players as well around him at the same time that have really struggled through that. Yeah. And it's just a testament to who he is and almost how mature he is as a person and having that understanding. I've been massively impressed with his attitude in pretty much every area. Like English, he just has something that you can't buy, but he's been through that tough period as well. And you must have seen a few other players as well that have really struggled with that process of coming through the other side of that tragic accident.
Yeah, and I can empathise, Earl. I can. Because I went through it myself, and a lot of things that Matty commented on in that interview, I'd lived those days. So Matty speaks extensively about taking the grief of others onto him. So just going back to that day, which I always say to Matty when we talk about it, I think it helps us both that we're forever changed from that day, regardless of moving on and the effect that time has. We're not the same people now, from witnessing what we witnessed that day. So I can certainly empathise, and like I say, Matty speaks extensively about taking on others' grief and just trying to be strong for everyone, and I guess having a little bit of disregard for his own needs during that period of time. And eventually, the slogans out there, it's okay not to be okay, but those kind of things only get normalised by speaking about them. And I guess Matthew was in that process for a long time, where he had a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions that were inside him, and he felt that potentially he had to be that strength for others around him, because it was a really, really tough period, especially in the aftermath of closing the academy down, and the decision was the squads with regards to whether they A, played rugby league again, or B, when they decided to come back and train and pick up a season where we were 3/4 of the way in. So to comprehend that of a young man who was 18 at the time is just unbelievable.
And you go from a background where you obviously know the players probably better than most people will, and especially going back to what Matty's spoken about in terms of mental health and things like that, it's how often do you in your position have to, because obviously you have players coming to yourself, but do you spot signs and therefore have to intervene? Because in my mind there'd be situations where there'd be players that they don't know they're suffering from it, but you'd be able to notice the signs.
You say I probably know the players the best. I'd probably rephrase that a little bit and say I know them as people. I don't necessarily know them as players, because I don't have the expertise to judge them, and I never would do. And that's one of the points that I've highlighted a couple of minutes ago. But as people, you have to work really hard, and these things don't happen overnight, and trust is built slowly over time. But in particular, some of the things that I've exposed myself to in relation to CPD recently, a particular counselling course that I did up at Kirklees College this year, had probably more of a profound effect on me personally as it did professionally. So in relation to showing people the core conditions of empathy, congruence and positive regard on a daily basis, you will find that you build relationships with people quickly. And the underlying is, which I keep speaking about, is that trust and that respect. And you go on different journeys with different players, so you'll pick that up probably a little bit quickly. So just to give you examples, people like Matthew English, Darnell McIntosh, Sam Hewitt, Sam Wood, people like that have come through the academy. When I was PPM, I knew them as 14 and 15-year-old players, so that's just an ongoing relationship with them. But there's certain people in the squad who, you have to work a little bit harder for. You have to be that example in relation to gain their trust, and rightly so. So just to go back to your question, it's to actually know someone as a person. You can actually see the signs. If you do see a slight subtle change in them as people, and that's one of the important roles in my job is actually spotting those early signs prior to actually then dealing with something that may come on the back of that, if that makes sense.
You make a real good point there, and this is something I sort of I've lived by and understood as I've got older, and through playing and through experience, that people do change though, don't they? You're not the same person you ever were from 10 years old when you think, what are you going to do with your life? And I probably dreamt about being a rugby player or an astronaut or something daft. But then you go from there to 20 years old when you're thinking about playing regular first team, and that's what your mindset is. Then getting to your 30s and you're probably more thinking about your after your career. Everybody changes, don't they? And I think that's probably something that's massively important for you. You have to have the understanding that what happened yesterday doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. People change quickly, and I guess you've got to adapt as well.
Absolutely, and that's where I'd look at my support network again, including yourself, to be able to empathise with that person when they face deselection or they face a long-term injury, or there's some circumstances around contractual negotiations. that's when I look on my support network to offer them that empathy in regards to supporting them in the best way that I can.
Something that interests me, Steve, is you must be like a sponge, basically, for everybody's problems at the club. Do you offload? Do you have a support network, a professional support network that you go to?
Yeah.
I'm looking at Steve here. I know one of his support groups.
Yeah, I didn't used to, and you learn from experience quickly. Again, just taking on, and don't get me wrong, there's large facets of the role which are really, really positive. But if someone provides you with a piece of information, it's then you own it as well, and you have to do something with that information. And it took me a fair number of months to be able to recognise, I guess, from a self-awareness point of view, that I needed to take care of myself if I could give any chance of then being able to offer support to others. So I guess the process I've just been through the past 18 months with the counselling and the importance of things like supervision. So Sporting Chances, as you're probably all aware, is Tony Adams' founder in counselling service that's available to every Super League player, including academy. And me as a PWM, I'm offered a supervision service quarterly and more if required. So that would mean me meeting with a qualified counsellor and me just offloading anything and everything that I feel necessary to them. And you'll find that after a conversation you never feel worse. So there may be a lot of feelings and emotions going around in your head, but in a funny way, being offered those core conditions that I keep talking about and having something come out of here, it makes you feel a lot better. And I always go on the notion of, if something's important to someone, eventually if you offer them those core conditions, they'll offer you it because it means something to them.
And you've been at the club now yourself for 7-8 years.
Yeah.
And like you said before, you were player performance manager with was it with the youth academy, that specifically?
With the junior and seniors, yeah.
And it's so what was your transition then from going from that to the job that you have now?
It was a case of the player welfare manager in post at the time. It was a part-time role back then, so the welfare role at Super League clubs has probably only been full-time for 18 months. It's also recently been seconded to Rugby League Cares, so the RFL don't actually run the welfare programme anymore or fund it. It's Rugby League Cares banner it comes under, so I'm really buoyed by the fact that change has happened. The first thing that happened straight away when it was seconded was a new member of staff was brought into post in the form of Steve McCormack, who was PWM at Wigan. Tremendous amount of experience, not only in welfare but coaching, development, etc. And he works predominantly with the players who are ready to transition, so that 27 plus age group. I know he's done some stuff with Earl recently around a range of things, preparing them or actually empathising with the position that they may be in at the moment and dealing multifacetedly with the main roles and needs at the time of that individual. But from a transitional point myself, getting the role, I just tried to spend as much time as I could with people that had done the role over a long time, and try to be a sponge myself and pick up as much as I could, alongside falling back on that support network. It's, I don't know if it's widely known, but we do frequent to a coffee club which will remain nameless most mornings, and that's a really good supervision. There's a lot of nonsense spoken,
ridiculous actually.
Yeah, but at the same time, indirectly we'd just being there for each other. And I guess you don't actually see the value of something like that until you haven't got it. So that's, whatever coping strategy or mechanisms that work for you, then keep doing them.
But obviously for me this is probably the lads that are even in it probably don't realise how much of a difference that's helped my transition as well. So what do we meet? Maybe 4 times a week, 5 times a week sometimes. It's every morning before work.
Yeah.
And for somebody who's come out of an environment surrounded by lads absolutely hammering each other every single day to then go and work in an office is quite a tough transition. I'm in there pretty much most mornings. We have a coffee and we absolutely hammer each other for about an hour. It's absolutely brilliant. And without that, I just wouldn't be able to get through the days like I do. I love walking into work because I've just had a coffee with my mates. We offload quite a bit and our frustrations. We have a laugh as well. But we're also setting challenges. We train together. We look to do different events, charity events, but without that sort of network, that support network for me personally, I don't think it would have been nowhere near as easy. I would have been lost, but I genuinely look forward to coming in the morning purely to see these lot. There's a couple of characters in there as well, and obviously
that's being kind.
Craig Mosedale's got to get a mention because
I think he's got a mention in every podcast, doesn't he? I think you'll have to get him in one. Well, no, maybe don't.
No, because you'd have to pretty much beep everything out because he just swears constantly. AKA Craig, the fat pig, Mosedale, and he'll be listening to this as well, so we're just sending our thoughts to you and stick by us because he is the guy that we basically hammer every morning, and he's a bit like you, Tim, really, for being small, but he's just for being really grey and looking like a pig.
Well, he's bigger than me.
He's a lot bigger than you,
Not a lot bigger than me, he's bigger than me.
I know, I think he is.
I think his waist's bigger, isn't it?
A lot bigger, he's...
and this gentleman's a kingpin of the NHS as well, so all I'll say is if you do actually have to ring 999 at any point, just be careful who gets out of the ambulance.
Because he would cause an accident or an incident. The way he looks, to be honest, he's that grey looking as well, and you imagine him jumping out of an ambulance, he's there to save you.
I have got a picture of him on the fireplace at home just to keep the kids away from it, to be honest.
I might give him a ring after that, see if he's alright.
I hope he listens to this. It might not be after this though, whenever this is going on.
Trying to get back on track here. Sorry, I know I'm ruining the banter. You said that a lot of the focus around sort of the transition for players is around 27, around that age. What happens with either players whose career gets cut short through injury, or they, through whatever reason they drop down the leagues? Well, is the support there for the lads like that? Yeah,
and those things are very real, Tim. So, as Earl's probably mentioned, it's not a given, isn't this sport? It's a brutal existence, and you've only to see players not only straight after a game, but the next day when they're back in work, you see some of the mental and physical states that they turn up to work in. It's a really brutal gladiatorial existence, but I think that support is there. I do. We had a young man probably 2 or 3 years ago now who found himself in a junior academy system. His next stage was to go into senior academy, which was under 19s, and we run a cry therapy test every year in relation to the ECG output of all our players, which is part of operational rules. And that young man walked into the room as a player. And he walked back out with a diagnosis of you won't play again. And this was a kid who was 16, going on 17 years old. So we had to deal with that. That is real. That's something that you have to act quickly, and you have to provide that individual with some information and some advice that they can work with. That young man transitioned out of the system. We, at the same time, we managed to secure him an apprenticeship back in his hometown, which was Sheffield, Barnsley, and it's just a case of just monitoring him and his progress probably for the next 12 to 18 months, which we did. We're really proud of the fact that not only the players that come from a scholarship up into first grade and play out on the main field, we're also proud of the fact that we've got a good idea of where our players go when they exit the system, because success for every person that comes to our door is not playing Super League. Success for them may be at the end of their academic journey going on to higher education, and that's a reality. And then playing at university, as much as we're a professional club and we're tasked with producing Super League players, you'll never get 30 Super League players out of a senior academy. That's just not the case, and that's where we go back to that holistic approach of you're dealing with people, not products.
And I'm interested in talking about injuries.
Yeah.
When you have a first team player come to you and they've had a serious injury of whatever kind, do you have set steps that you go through to say, right, this is the next step you're taking, or is it dependent on who is in front of you?
It's important to state at this time that my relationship with our club doctor and the medical staff in particular our head physiotherapist Will Carlos is so important to the role. So we have open communication on a daily basis, and Il's probably best qualified to comment on this a little bit more. You may find that certain members of your playing staff may open up a little bit more to your medical staff, and there's been times in the past where I've maybe not been aware of certain piece of information that a player have maybe disclosed to a physiotherapist or a doctor. So as long as that player's happy in relation to consent and confidentiality of that information being passed on, then they are so important for me in the role that I do at the club. So I guess sorry Dale, do you want to jump in there? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it is accurate, and I think you're quite right. It all depends on the players as individuals as well, because it is very much a private and confidential thing. Is this what we're talking about? And this is probably what frustration of fans is actually, because we don't get that much information about injuries, but it's the private side of it. It's confidentiality. We can't give that much information away. You can't do it for the players' sake as much as anything else. As a player who went through a career with not that many injuries, I don't think mentally I struggled that much with being in rehabilitation. So I go into rehab and I'd only ever been there for 4 weeks. I quite enjoyed it, but I was surrounded by players that were regular in there, the ones that picked up long injuries, that really, really did struggle. You could see it in the body language, the way they spoke to you, and you could see how it was getting them down massively. And I remember at that time we had no support mechanism for these players at all. And it was a strange environment where you get one player who would be injured for a while, they come back, play a couple of games, and then they'd be injured for another 6-8 weeks, and it just felt like that. Those are the players that really did struggle. The ones that just picked up an injury now and again kind of just used it as a break and a chance to get fit again. It is all down to the individual, but the beauty is now we do have people in place, and it's more, I'd say now it's more socially acceptable to speak about these things, because we do put a lot of emphasis on males now talking more than ever. Would you say that sort of changed in your time here? Do you think
absolutely,
talk more?
Absolutely, and just going back to the thing that Matty did for us last week helps. It helps normalise these kind of conversations that have maybe in the past been put away or put to the side, or seen as the wrong thing to do, or seen as a weakness within a sport that we keep talking about as so gladiatorial. Just going back to the point of if we're given that circumstance of a player that's sustained an injury, I guess picking up as much information as we can from medical staff is key for me. For obvious reasons, a lot of my time in the role is spent around the boys who are injured or who are in rehabilitation, because 9 times out of 10 they're away from the squad, and they may find themselves at times quite isolated. But I've found the subtle things work best. So just asking somebody how they are and being actually genuinely interested in what they want to offer you, and having those active listening skills, and actually giving them that basis of that you care and that you're actually interested in their welfare is a real important thing. Obviously, from a long-term injury, there may only be a limited amount of things that I can do from my perspective, if they face a long rehabilitation process, but just checking in with them on a regular basis, just just lets that person know that you're thinking about them, that they're still in your thoughts, because they may feel quite isolated at that point with a lot of uncertainty about the future.
Where's the harder part of the process for players then, do you find? Is it the acceptance that they're going to be out for however many weeks that they've been told, or is it the stage where they're coming back into the play, do you think?
I think at this point it's really important to give a lot of credit to our medical department and the relationships that they have with the players. They work really hard on all the areas that I've spoken about in relation to the interpersonal skills that they have and the actual empathy and congruence that they show our players. So they do genuinely care. So there may be occasions where the rehabilitation process is completely out of their control, and you'll find that a player is probably at his lowest ebb once, not necessarily straight after an injury's occurred, when they actually find out the length of that process, and you'll find that their mental state progressively improves the closer they get to actually returning back to full squad sessions, because that's what they crave. We as human beings, we pack animals out. We love to be around people. We're sociable, and you'll find that the mental state improves the closer they get to that point.
Can be quite reactive as well off the back of these injuries, and I know from personal experience again, it could be the fact that you've started running again, and suddenly you're thinking, I'm nearly there now. I've started running, I'm back on the field. But then you can tweak something could go again, it can tighten up, and you're back off feet for another 2 weeks, and it's that sort of mental roller coaster of an injury which really does affect you as well. So sometimes you feel like you're getting closer, but then suddenly you're taking another step back again, or 2 steps back. And that's the difficulty with these injuries, is you never know exactly how your body's going to react, and off the back of that your mind as well, because it does really affect you. And then you go into the games and you just don't feel right. And someone like Leroy, for instance, I think some fans probably expect him to come back 100% fit. He's nowhere near 100% fit, and I don't mean as in he isn't fit enough to run around. His engine might be good, but his body's going to take quite a long time to get back to anywhere near where it was. He could be playing at 70%, 75%. These are, as we say, the gladiators that will put their body on the line and get out there as soon as they can. He's fit enough to play, but he won't be quite right for some time, and mentally that still affects you as well as a player. So there's a massive balance between everything here, and it's not black and white. It's very, very difficult to understand. You can just do the best you can by people, and Steve's obviously got that trust, and he's somebody I've talked to, no problem at all, because he has got that trust and that respect as much as anything else.
Something I've always wondered, sort of when we're talking about rehabilitation, a player coming back and not being as fit, but your body must get conditioned to taking that hit, sort of however many times a game, sort of running up against brick walls. If you've been out for a long layoff, do you sort of go back to square one with your body being conditioned to take that impact?
Yeah, you do to a certain degree, but it's muscle memory, so your body, or your mind always remembers it. It doesn't take you long. It'll take you one game,
and then you go,
it is funny because you become immune to it, and you can see the biggest hits in the world, and so you get absolutely nailed off your feet, on your back, and then you get back up, and it's like you never even felt it. It's just that is what you're designed to do. But eventually, those hits have an effect, and something breaks. Unfortunately, and I've had 4 operations on my left elbow. I've had 3 on my knees. I've had 2 on my shoulders, my nose several times, my ankle. I think about 13 operations. And as it stands, I may have to have another one at some point, and this is after 2.5 years after playing. It has that effect on you, so you can take it, you become immune to it, but eventually it still bites you, it gets you eventually, and no matter what, you're not invincible, and then you've got to recover from that. And ultimately the reason I'm not playing now is my body can't take it, and you've got to recognise that.
He'll make some really valid points there. I guess it's worth saying, and I'm sure he won't mind, someone like Leroy, who out of a long period of adversity for him, not being able to play the game that he loves and what he's played for so many years, I've actually got to know him really, really well as a person, simply because of the contact time that I've had with him. And on the back of that, it's allowed me to, I guess, facilitate some more of the holistic needs that relate to him around, you know, life after rugby league and various other little bits and pieces. I've really got to know him well as a person. So I guess there is a positive out of him being out for so long.
Is there ever a situation where a player doesn't want to or might not want to engage with you?
Yeah. And
what would be the process? Do you just have to respect that and leave it alone, or do you try and sort of work around that? Or?
Yeah, there has been occasions with that, and that's a case of respecting that player's wishes. You know, it's not a one size fits all, and that's the skill of the PWM, I feel, and a little bit of experience of how to deal with those situations. Something, for example, in relation to PWMs being tasked with players being engaged in either an academic course or work experience, that player might not actually be ready in that period of their life to actually take on board that, and that might be for a range of reasons that's personal to them. So it's a case of you respecting that and, you know, continuing to work alongside them and just supporting them in any other ways that you can. But in relation to into various other things that maybe crop up in the job, you have to respect that from an individual's point of view, that they're just maybe not ready, or they don't want to broach that subject with you. And I guess that's the importance of having your support network of your medical staff, of certain players that are in that first grade squad. So, for example, Leroy Cudjoe has done his mental health first aid qualification when he was out injured previously. So Leroy's actually based in the playing squad there to pick up on certain things that maybe certain individuals may not pick up on.
Is confidentiality the sort of prime objective? I mean, would there ever be a situation where you would be concerned about a player's welfare and you know something? Would there ever become a point where you would have to break that confidentiality?
Confidentiality is quite complex, and it's the cornerstone of the role. So there's a lot of common sense involved with certain things that you become privy to, which I've already covered. But there is situations yet in where you would have to break confidentiality, in particular around the fact that if you were genuinely concerned that someone was actually planning to do harm to themselves or others, that's when you would be privy to pass that information on to a third party to give them the necessary support available. So I guess, just speaking from experience, when I first started the role, before I did my counselling qualifications, I felt at times where a player would come to me and I put a lot of pressure on myself to actually solve all their problems within a 10-minute window. And that, looking back, that's so ludicrous to think that way, you know. Whereas now I take a much more broad approach, much more holistic approach of just giving them those conditions and listening to them. But at the same time as well, my role is all about, at times, signposting them to specialist areas. So I'm not a qualified counsellor. You know, I am trained in counselling skills, but I'm not a qualified counsellor. So something like Sporting Chance is always available there. So if I feel that individual requires that specialist need, then I will pass on that support to an external source.
What other bits? So you say we talk about all these different things. I don't think fans will probably realise how much opportunities there are out there. Obviously, someone like Julie Measures, for instance, who's a name that you'll know very well because you deal with her all the time. Yeah. But after I retired, she came and had a coffee with me and gave me loads of different options and put something together for me moving forward, which was absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Can you talk us through a few of those different things that they can utilise and take on board, or educate themselves through what you provide and what the RFL provides especially? Yeah,
absolutely. So it's definitely a whole club approach as well. From I've spoken to Earl in the past about a range of fantastic sponsors that are involved that finance certain facets of the club, and I look to those obviously for people who may be opportunity to give players work experience, meaningful work experience. I know there's a range of examples at other clubs where PWMs talk about people going on some work experience process and then actually a full-time role being available to them as and when their playing career comes to an end. So I'd be foolish not to look within, because I know the fantastic work that Brian and Earl and Andrew and everybody else involved with commercial and bringing sponsors into the club do. So, I know Earl mentioned the people up at Burton Hills Wealth Management, absolutely fantastic resource there on our doorstep, obviously just up in Kirkburton, and being able to engage with them and provide those with our playing resources is fantastic. It's just a win-win with the specific support that they provide. I spoke about Steve McCormack being employed as a transitional manager at the same time as the welfare provision was seconded to Rugby League Cares. Julie Measure got a full-time role, so Julie is the full-time careers coach for all Super League players. So, for example, if it's happened with Earl, if Earl would like a specific discussion around either work experience or having some more information around starting an academic course of study, or just to throw some ideas around that's maybe when I would signpost, because I'd never try and guess and give him information that's either false or inaccurate. So it's just a conversation to Julie, book an appointment that's suitable for the player and her, and she would come along to Huddersfield to meet at a venue of the player's choice, and they'd sit and she would formulate a career action plan for them, and she'd discuss a range of different options available to them. As well, with regards to Rugby League Cares, they offer educational grants to all Super League players. So we've had numerous players in the past. It's a process which is quite formal that I complete on behalf of the player, and that provides them with a distinct amount of reduction in costs, whether that be tuition fees or a central cost for a course. So there's so much things available to players now, but they have to be prepared to access it as well, if that makes sense. And that's the drum that we constantly bang. If you are leaving the game now and to nothing, and you have no career plan, then you have to take some responsibility for that as well, because everything is there for you to access, but you have to be prepared to access that as well, with the support of others, obviously. But Julie is highly skilled in what she does. She's helped numerous players this year. I think the last PWM meeting we went to, I think we're the club with the highest number of career action plans in relation to players. I think we currently stand at, I think it's between 18 or 20. So she's been out and met individuals on a one-to-one basis, provided them a career plan, set them some goals from a short, medium and long-term perspective, including myself, in that action plan to help them, facilitate them to the right pathway towards a course of study or academic qualification. It's me working with that player then moving forward to a destination.
What was your career path? Well, you come from an academic background, so you obviously left university at 21, I presume. Yeah. What was your path to where you are now, and did you see yourself sort of being where you are? Or, there was obviously some events that led to you being where you are, I guess, but... Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why I empathise with young players, because at 21 I had no idea what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. I knew it was something with sport. So from studying at undergraduate, I did sport and exercise science at Leeds Met, which was then now Beckett. And from there I took a long course of time away, and I went and travelled. So I was on the road for best part of 6 years. Basically, back then there was you could purchase an open-ended ticket, which I think my ticket was around £1,000, and the deal was you had 12 stops anywhere around the world within a 3-year period, which I took on. Covered most of Southeast Asia, Australia, like a lot of people do, New Zealand, North America, South America. So I got a real broad perspective, and I grew up a lot as a person. And within that journey, I got given a lot of opportunities, in particular with Australia and New Zealand, because I've always been a fan of the sport, to work within a developmental capacity. And I guess those direct experiences provided me with some workable skills to be able to apply for a role at the club when I came back. And then I think if you hang around in certain environments long enough and you do a good job, then there's an opportunity for progression, which really happened to me. I mean, Andy Jordan did a fantastic job of welfare on a part-time basis when he was here, and he juggled that alongside logistics, and he did the kit as well. And then he got an opportunity with Manchester United, so he left the club and that role was vacant. And it was something that I felt that I'm not a coach, I can't provide anything to a player, tech-tac or physically, I just can't do that. But I found that from a welfare perspective, maybe that's where I fit best in this environment, and I found a little bit of a niche there, and my skill set could maybe be applied best to that role, and went for it and was successful.
I think one of my favourite reasons for doing this is that, and you've nailed it early on, was how you learn about players and staff within the club as people, and there's a lot of fans who come to the games and they see their players and they're just players in their eyes. And social media has been a brilliant thing in some ways, in that we spread the message of what Matty did the other week, and but on the other hand, you have very aggressive people on social media who will get at people within the club and on the pitch for performances and stuff like that. And I'm interested to know if you get cases with players where that actually does affect them.
There has been occasions in the past. We try and do a lot of education around social media in particular, which is obviously huge now and will only get bigger. And we try and our most powerful tool is education, and we try and educate as much as we can. But there has been instances in the past where the individuals have been negatively influenced by that, and it's easy to see how and why, especially with some of the vile things that are posted online. But it's a case of just trying to educate that individual the best way we can. But it's something that will sit alongside professional sport now and will become more and more prominent. And we all know in this room that social media used correctly is just the most amazing thing. But unfortunately, it's a world that we live in as well.
I just bring it up because it's something that I don't think a lot of people don't understand really. Is it does genuinely impact people. I don't know if you would have felt like yourself, Earl, in the latter stages when stuff like Twitter would have been more of a bigger tool back then.
Do you know what? No, because I was probably more educated at that point within rugby circles. I've been hammered by fans all the time. It's just sort of something that I managed to, and I don't like using this word, but I managed to toughen up to. And the reason I did that is because I had some really good sound advice off a few different people. I used to check the RL forums when I was younger, because we didn't have the social media. It wasn't Twitter. That's what you'd look on there. Young kid who just had a good game, or go and have a little look, and everyone's saying really nice things. Then I'd have an okay game and started being hammered by people, and I started taking it really personally. And I got told, I can't remember which player it was that told me back then, said don't ever read them, because that's just that's the way it works, and that's what'll happen. So I never did. And then another thing I got told to do was sit in the crowd and watch the game from in the crowd with all the fans. And quite quickly you realise that a lot of those fans, not all of them, quite a lot, know what they're on about. There's quite a few that do not have a clue. Shout abuse, shout everything that's totally wrong. And when you've got an understanding of how the game is played from a professional point of view, you realise how many people are sat in the crowd that don't really understand it.
You've only got to sit there for 5 minutes and realise that every pass the opposition throws forward. Every pass, there's somebody shouting forward. You're like, wait. Which angle are you looking at it from?
It can be frustrating, but when you sit in it and then you start taking it on board, all these different comments that you hear, you realise that people don't have a clue, and you can't take it too personally, because half of these people that are abusing you are either doing it just to get a rise out of you, or they just generally don't have a clue. And what the biggest thing I did on the Twitter especially is I use that to my advantage. I've always pushed things that I want to push, and if anyone abuses me, I block them. Just say no, I don't reply to them, I block them straight away. And I've even had people come up to me and go, "Oh, Earl, you blocked this guy on Twitter." I'm like, I haven't got a clue who I've blocked, mate, to be honest with you. I have no interest in what you have to say. I don't know what it was about. I don't really care. And they think they've won, but really they haven't, because I don't even recognise them. I don't know them. I don't know what they said to me. The best thing is just to block it and move on, and it's quite simple. I think I'm up to about 80 people. I was trying to get to 100, but since I've retired, I don't get abused.
How do you feel about me blocking you? Without, you know,
I didn't realise I was blocked, mate. So that shows you how much interest I took in you as well.
I haven't really.
When I first came to the club, Nathan Brown was head coach, and I remember him saying that if you listen too much to the people in the crowd giving you abuse, you'll eventually end up sitting with them. So it's kind of quite blocks in relation to that. But
that's good. That's a good one. That
you must be devastated that Tim's blocked you.
I don't, yeah, that's it.
Are you down to 43,000 followers then?
No, 48 and a half.
Oh, right, okay. Sorry, you're short.
Are you on Twitter? I didn't even know.
I am, I just don't use it.
I don't know.
I just read your nonsense. I just use it to read your nonsense.
Influencer, that's why.
Yeah. In all seriousness, I know his time's precious, but it's probably someone like Earl who I could maybe tap into his knowledge and skill base in the future. When we're talking about people like the senior twins or Dominic Young, who made his debut a few weeks ago, the dramatic exposure that they get overnight by representing the team in first grade is it's day and night. So it's maybe something I could task Earl with in the future. And coffee.
One more thing that I wanted to talk about in you personally is your work that you do, and you've done a hell of a lot in terms of in the memory of Ronan.
Yeah.
And you've done marathons and Ironmans, and you take part in the Magic Ride, and you've obviously got the festival that you said was tomorrow.
Tomorrow night. Yeah.
I'm just interested to know your personal motivation for doing all this stuff that you do.
Yeah. My coping mechanisms. That's how I cope. And when I'll probably get asked to open the festival tomorrow night, and it'll be tough. It'll be really tough. I'm getting a bit of emotional now with regards to some of the memories that come back from that day. So that's the way I cope. And I went through a long period of time of doing similar to what Matty did, and taking on a lot of people's grief and being there for a lot of people and kind of overlooking what I was feeling myself. And at the time, it just felt right to try and raise money. I've always tried to keep a good level of fitness, and I thought if I can do that and raise a little bit of cash and some awareness around Ronan's two charities, which are the Yorkshire Air Ambulance and Headway, which are a brain injury association specialists who provided, in particular, Ronan's mum and dad and his sister Chloe some support in that time between him being injured and then him passing. If I can provide some awareness and raise some money for charities that are 100% dependent on funding, then I feel that I'm making a difference that way, because I can't do what the guys do out there. But that's how I cope, if that makes sense.
What would you say is the toughest thing you've done in terms of the charity for that?
Probably the marathon. The marathons are tough. The marathons are probably 22 miles too long. The first 4 miles are brilliant. They're really good. No, in all seriousness, the marathons are hard, but it's the training that you have to do. So someone who's not built for long distance, you're facing a 17-week training program. So to do a spring marathon, normally your training starts around, it's normally Christmas week. So the days are short in relation to daylight. The weather's normally rubbish, and you're out there pounding, and you've got everything else to manage. I've got a young family. There's other commitments, etc., etc. But it's worth it in the end. But you learn a lot about yourself over that distance. But to run something as iconic as London twice, I ran New York in 2015. It's just the life-changing things, and as a dad I can look back and get my participation medal out because I never won anything.
Say 2015, was that the time or the year?
It's probably near the time. I remember, if we've got time, just to give you a story, at the end of New York, you finish in the iconic Central Park, and just the things that happen to you mentally. I guess I'm trying to empathise with players out there when they're getting bashed and wrestled and whatever else. And I remember with 600 metres to go, I was contemplating packing in and coming back the next day and finishing 600 metres,
wow.
which is probably here to the other stand, and they're the levels of despair I got into. And I remember finishing and sitting down and thinking I was just sat on this curb in Central Park for 5 minutes. I'm thinking I'm gassed here, sat there. And a lady from their equivalent of the Red Cross came over and she said, "Can I help you to your feet, young man?" And I said, "Just give me a minute here." I felt like I was going to throw up if I stood up at that point. And she went, she says, "You've been sat here 2 hours." She says, "We've been watching you," which I thought was 5 minutes in my own head. So some of the places you go, is a bit weird. And then when I finished London the first time, I remember prior to that I'd got some digs in Greenwich, which is a stone's throw from the start in Greenwich Park, obviously, finish on the Mall. And I remember finishing and walking up and thinking, I don't know where I am, I don't know where I'm going. And I asked a policeman, and I said, can you help me with directions to get back to my hotel? And he said, "Well, where are you staying?" And for the life of me, I couldn't answer that question. And he said, "Well, we've met a few of you today, so go and sit over there on that bollard and give yourself 15 minutes." And for the life of me, I couldn't think where I was staying, what I was doing. So, but in the aftermath of that, I feel like I've done what I needed to do in relation to coping and the reasons why I'm doing it. So, as much as it's dark at the time, it makes for a good story in the future.
Do you want to just give us a bit of information about tomorrow, about the festival, about what's happening where, what time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Ronan's anniversary is predominantly June the 14th, but due to the inclement weather a few weeks ago in Huddersfield, the facility wasn't available. I think it was half underwater, so it was called off that evening with a rearranged date for tomorrow, which will be the 17th, Wednesday the 17th. We're probably looking at kicking off the festival around 5:30. There's going to be in excess of 350 kids down there from a range of community clubs across Kirklees and Calderdale. So, come down and support. It's just a festival of rugby league to honour a young man's memory who lived and breathed the sport, who dedicated his life, and the legacy lives on. And to see all these young people running around and playing the game that they love will be a fantastic occasion. Hopefully we get a little bit of nice weather and it'll be really successful like it's been the last 2 years.
And I guess we could speak all day about you, Joel. We've already spoken probably longer now just about this than most other stuff, but we have to go on to talking about the last game on Friday. And obviously lost to Catalan wasn't not ideal by any means. 32-28. Probably I really felt like we were going to take it at the end at one point. I really thought we were going to make it over the line.
What an exciting game for a neutral. I thought, if you were watching that game on television, which it wasn't, but if you were watching that game as a neutral, what a spectacle for rugby league that would have been for you, wouldn't it? Just really frustrating as a Huddersfield Giants fan, I think.
For me, I actually I wasn't here. It's the first game I've missed this season, and
so last year I kept asking people where, and people kept saying you were here, and I was looking around, I was like, surely you'd notice you're somewhere.
I was actually, if I'm being honest, I was in Silverstone. I was enjoying the Formula 1 for the weekend, so I was keeping up to date on. I was getting messages. My daughter was here, full enough, so she kept updating me. I was on Twitter. My internet was going. It was frustrating, and they managed to obviously claw it back, which shows a bit of character, I suppose, but by the sounds of it, it was sort of long gone by that point. So another reaction, this game that come this week is absolutely huge, so be interested to see what happens.
Well,
funny how we managed to move up a space in the table with a loss,
we went up.
Weird, didn't it?
Very weird.
No.
leaves us in a position now where our next 2 games are both against 2 clubs who are both on exactly the same points as us. So we're all on 16 points as Leeds and Hull KR, and it's almost like we've gone for a weekend where we had the tennis, which was the closest Wimbledon final, longest that we've ever had. We had the cricket, which is probably the closest World Cup final that has ever been, and sort of don't want to get dragged into another closest table battle towards the end of the season, but it looks like it might be getting there.
Teams are all picking up form as well. It's only London that at the moment are struggling a little bit, but I don't think, as Robbo actually said last week, no one will underestimate them. They're not an easy beat. You put your full team out because they can turn you over. Hopefully they don't pick up any more form for our sake, but we need to improve and pick up a couple more wins, because we are in dangerous territory at the moment. I think we're going to be absolutely fine, but you can't just rest on that and can't rely on moving up places when you're not winning.
Tim Burton's prediction: 4 points in the next 2 games. We'll beat Hull. We'll beat Hull KR. We'll beat Leeds.
And that Leeds game in particular, I've already seen a lot of marketing for that going out at the moment, because it's obviously...
Yeah, we've got our Armed Forces Day happening on the 2nd of August, where we'll be signing the Covenant. So there's a thing called the Armed Forces Covenant, where the Armed Forces are asking organisations, not just sports organisations, but any organisations, to get involved, and just to say that you'll support people from the Armed Forces, once they've left. So in sort of very much like soldiers leaving the army, like Super League players leaving Super League, they have to integrate into civilian life. So the Covenant is about saying that as an organisation, the Huddersfield Giants will support people from the armed forces going forward. So that's going to be a great thing for us. We've got plenty going on. I think we've got a military band. We've got a guard of honour. A real guard of honour with soldiers there. So plenty of things going on at that game.
Which is quite a spectacle.
Friday 2nd of August. Get yourself down.
And again, I don't think we've got much else to cover really, unless you got anything to add, Steve.
There was one thing I forgot to mention. I don't know how much time we've got. When you spoke specifically about education and work experience, we've currently got a tremendous initiative with Wetherby Prison at the moment. So I don't know if you know, the institute over at Wetherby house 300 of the most dangerous young people in the country. So 80% of inmates of 15 to 18 year olds. So 80% of inmates are in there for committing knife crime, and 70% of inmates are there on life sentences. We have Darnell McIntosh, Akula Uarte, Sumatagi, and it'll come to me. I feel really bad now. They go over on they completely give up their time.
Willie Poaching.
Willie Poaching's involved as well. He came over, and Oliver Roberts. So those 4, along with Willie, they for the past probably 8 to 10 weeks have given up their free time. So a lot of the time they're asked to go over on non-training days, and they're leading a mentoring program with the young people that are in there. So it's a case of them going in, building some interpersonal skills with the young men inside, and trying to make a difference to their lives, because a lot of these people have got nothing, albeit they've committed a crime, but there's a lot of them who have been disowned by friends and family. And I guess it's important to give Suya in particular some real credit for how he's conducted himself, how he's represented the club, and he's recently been taken on as an official speaker by the Offload programme now, which is a mental health awareness campaign run by Rugby League Cares. So just some tremendous work happening off the field as well, which is just really commendable.
I think that's a brilliant note where we can end on now, and it's thank you very much, Steve, for offering everything you've brought to it.
Steve,
thank you for asking me.
Really brilliant insight into the club, and I think a lot of the players and hopefully the fans can take on board a lot of what you said and think about things before they post them on Twitter. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll be back again next week. Brilliant. Cheers, gents.
Cheers, mate. Brilliant. That.
Is that right?
Yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely.
Honestly,
No problem. No
I
worries.
always say after every one, best one that, but that was
It's all right.
spot on.